Hello, and welcome to another episode of Fiction Depiction. Today, I'm going to be talking about The Heart's Invisible Furies by John Boyne. I'm going to do my best to try to give you an articulate review on this book without gushing and sighing the whole way. The Heart's Invisible Furies follows Cyril Avery. He is an Irishman and he's born in the 40s, and this story chronicles his life starting from in the womb all the way until I believe he is 70 years old. And it follows him from Ireland to Amsterdam to New York, back to Ireland. It chronicles his relationships, his family, his adoptive family, his friendships, his work. And more specifically, it follows his struggle with being a gay man in the 50s, 60s, 70s, and 80s, and what that means in each decade. And also being a gay man in Ireland, which I believe it was illegal up until relatively recently to be gay in Ireland. It also follows his friendship with Julian over many, many years, his unrequited love for Julian. It also follows his relationship with his eccentric adoptive parents, Charles and Maud. You follow Cyril while he is still hiding his sexuality and what that does to him, what that does to his heart, how destructive it is when you are hiding your true self from the world, how destructive it can be to your soul, how it influences the decisions that he makes in his life and where his life goes from there, just because he's hiding who he is. And then later in life, as he is more open about who he is, and you see his personality blossom when he becomes more honest with himself and with the world about who he is. And you can hear how he relates to people so much differently and so much more honestly through the different stages in his life, as a child, as a teenager, as a young man in his 20s, and as he gets older in his 40s and 50s. And it is just brilliantly told, and Cyril makes his way into your heart as you follow his life journey. It's told in first person from Cyril's point of view, and it starts from when he is in the womb. And it's a little off-putting at first because he is referring to his mother while he's in the womb, but it works. And it kind of tells that story just to let the reader know where he comes from. And then the next part of the story is 7 years later. He's 7 years old, and you get kind of a recap, without it feeling like a recap, of where he is and why he's there. He's been adopted by Charles and Maud. He meets Julian, who ends up being a friend for a very long time, and his relationship with Julian is very important. He's discovering feelings that he has for Julian. You learn early on what his relationship is like with his adoptive parents and how that affects the rest of his life. And certain things happen in that period of time, and then it moves on to the next section of the book, which is 7 years later. He's a teenager. He is still friends with Julian. He's in a school. It's in the early 50s. It talks about the shenanigans he gets into as a teenager. And a significant event happens towards the end of that section, and then it'll break away, and then you're 7 years later. And in its way, it smoothly tells you what's happened from that event from before into the present. And then you move on into that section of his life. 7 years later, he's in his early 20s. So it is linear. I don't believe there are any flashbacks that I can remember other than just recapping what has happened in the previous section, because it kind of leaves you with a cliffhanger. Something significant happens and then it breaks to 7 years later. So it's very easy to follow. One perspective, one linear timeline, very easy to read. The pacing of this book, there are peaks and valleys in this story where at the peaks there's something major happening in Cyril's life, and you definitely want to see what happens next, and the pacing picks up. And then there's a lull where the dust is settling, but in those valleys it doesn't slow down per se, because the dialogue in this book is just so fantastic. I mean, the wit and the humor. And if you're like me and you appreciate dry Irish wit. It's just superb. So the pacing is such that at its peak, you really want to know what's happening next. And then at the lower valleys where it's a little bit more steady, you want to know what's going to be said next. I got through this rather thick book pretty quickly. And I will say, full disclosure, I listened to this. And if you enjoy listening to books, I highly recommend this. And if you are thinking about listening to books and you are not really comfortable or you don't think that you would like listening to a book, I actually would recommend this because it's told in such a linear format. You're not worried about what time frame you're in. The narrator is actor Stephen Hogan, and he does a phenomenal job narrating this book. Because Cyril is Irish and it starts off in Ireland, Stephen Hogan is an Irish actor, and he has that lovely Irish lilt that just offers the authenticity that this book so deserves. It's just a delight to listen to. Probably one of the best narrated books I have ever listened to. And just a little side note, I had put an Instagram review on this and I tagged Stephen Hogan. Of course, I tagged John Boyne as well. I don't want to diminish the work put in by the author, but I tagged Stephen Hogan and he commented on the post and said that he was touched by it, and that was like, I fangirled the crap out of that. So the themes that are explored in this book: prejudice, obviously, sexuality, friendships, found family, and how that can go either very, very poorly or very well. It also explores religion. This talks a lot about the church in Ireland and the stance that the specifically Catholic Church has on homosexuality. But I think John Boyne handled all the themes very, very well. It was masterfully constructed. While the themes are very serious in nature, I learned a lot about the different themes that were talked about in this book. I was so surprised at how funny the book was. There were so many parts where I laughed out loud. And one thing that I think is just an incredible art for an author to have is to be able to talk about a theme that is so serious, that is heartbreaking, but at the same time makes you laugh. Not at the heartbreak, but in the face of it. And there are multiple times where that happens in this book. And when a story is able to do that, that just elevates it that much more. So it goes without saying, all the stars, 5 stars out of 5. Who specifically I would recommend this to? If you like historical fiction, if you like Irish fiction, absolutely. If you just love a story that spans decades, centering around one particular character or a small handful of characters, absolutely, I would recommend this book to you. Other books that I would compare this to, if you read Shuggie, Bain by Douglas Stuart, I would recommend this book to you if you enjoyed that one. If you like the historical fiction, the Scottish backdrop, the LGBTQ themes involved, then you would also like this book. The People We Keep by Allison Larkin, another historical fiction, chronicles a life of a specific character finding herself. Finally, The Great Believers by Rebecca Makai, another historical fiction spanning decades that also has themes of LGBTQ. To wrap up, who would I cast in the movie of The Heart's Invisible Furies, which I read that Ridley Scott bought the rights to this book. Ridley, if you're watching, please get on it. Who would I cast? So for Cyril, I would get 3 different actors to portray the different stages in his life. As a young boy, I would cast Jacob Tremblay. And then in the 20s, 30s, 40s-ish, I would cast Cillian Murphy, who, oh my God, what a dream. And then in his 50s, 60s, and 70s, I would cast Gabriel Byrne. And for Julian, as a young boy, I would cast Jaden Martell. And then for his 20s and 30s and possibly 40s, I would cast Hayden Christensen. And for the later years in his life, I would cast Jude Law. For Catherine, which is Cyril's mother, she wasn't in the story long enough for me to kind of fully develop a visual of her, but later on in life, I would cast Brenda Fricker. And finally, I would cast Saoirse Ronan for Alice. So that is my fiction depiction for the Heart's Invisible Furies. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you're still watching at this point, please give that like button a boop and subscribe. I would really appreciate it. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next time. Bye-bye.